And again, I'm playing devil's advocate here. Mm-hmm. I really don't know. And I think if we're going to post this, we need to lead with that. I don't know. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate because it's fun.
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
Kyle, what's your hot take on whether or not humans would be perceived as ants or stupid, for lack of a better word, to an advanced alien species?
We certainly would not, in my opinion. And I take a strong position on that, even though there's no evidence. We've not encountered any alien species. You could draw parallels about, hundreds of years ago when disparate societies met each other, but that's a very loose parallel. We're still the same species. And yeah, there's this idea of they're these galactic Dyson sphere creatures. They would look at us as so primitive. However, we are all Turing machines. We all face the same computational limits of the universe. And our model of physics all but explains almost everything. We have the source code of the universe. We figured it out, same as they would have. There must be some sort of Turing test equivalence that they would look at us through, even if we're slow and behind them.
I haven't really thought about this question much, and my hot take, I don't know that I have a hot take. I feel like we could appear that way. Let's take historical example. If you took a human who understands, like a PhD in physics right now, let's just say, they understand everything about modern physics, and you stuck them with no historical knowledge whatsoever, and you stuck them in 600 BC, I would say that
they're dead.
They do not appear to be stupid or appear as ants. They do not appear that stupid. And now the reverse of it, would the alien species, or would the Egyptians or 600 BC people look at the iPhone and think it was magic? Yeah, probably.
Almost certainly, if they understood what it was and what it does, yes.
But the advanced alien species has a comprehension of scale and timeline. Now we're talking about an alien species. So first, let's put that alien aside and say, what if 100,000 years from now, we humans were still around, which is entirely possible on the Earth's timeline, right? Whether or not we destroy it.
Yeah, it's a nice way to say it. Yep.
Yeah. So it's possible for us to be around and survive. And let's say that happens. If this 100,000 more evolved human looked at us today or looked at 600 BC, the only thing preventing them from looking like ants or stupid is the comprehension of evolution and timeline of things. If you understood, look, I'm here and I'm 100,000 years ahead of them, that allows me to understand, oh, yeah, that makes sense where they are. It's kind of like looking at a baby. Well, you shit yourself. I get it. You do that because you're a baby.
Right. But I think it's a bit unfair at the same time. If some kind of science fiction way we got displaced in time, I think we would find these people that in our heads are implicitly primitive to be surprisingly sophisticated in ways we don't know. Because people are good at self-organizing even when they don't have modern tools. Like babysitting. There had to have always been a problem of parents finding ways to have their kids looked after. I bet you in ancient Rome there was some really interesting, phone tree kind of system, whatever. They figure stuff out with the tools at hand, and people are clever regardless of what tools they have.
Yes, but it's only within the context of understanding that they're basically infants compared to your timeline. When you compare humans to humans, that kind of works because humans are going to be aware of their timeline. But if an alien species comes that's 100,000 years older than our species, maybe they do know it because they've analyzed the planet, whatever. But at first blush, people today may appear infantile by comparison. You could take the infantile emotionally, infantile technologically, infantile emotionally because we're getting into wars and we're, competing for resources instead of cooperating. Maybe there's an alien species that doesn't do that at all. Infantile from a tech perspective because they've gone so far beyond the technology that we understand today that our technology looks like us throwing rocks with letters on them, the speed at which it looks like to them.
Yeah, I would compare more to a century ago. Look at cars today versus 1921, right?
I don't know, but totally different, yeah.
I mean, we see a linear transformation. If someone came to the future, they wouldn't be like, what is that magical box, they would say, okay, that's an advanced car, recognize it, and probably learn how to drive it quickly. Like when you compare to a baby you can't teach rapidly. Some problems that have known solutions, you can rapidly teach. Like if I got time displaced to like the, I don't know, 1100s, I think the best thing I could do would be to let doctors know to wash their hands. Isn't that my highest impact option? Just a simple thing like that? Just because I know it and they don't yet. But once I tell them, they've got it.
Sure, you're right. The baby analogy isn't necessarily perfect because the baby doesn't have enough assimilated knowledge to be able to assimilate new knowledge quickly. That's basically the difference.
So maybe that's it. Will we lose that? Will we lose the ability to assimilate knowledge quickly?
Right. That was the question I was going to ask. And I think that's important is if an alien species came and they were so advanced, when they look at us, or let's say they give us a piece of information, to them, it seems really simple. But to us, breaking it down is so complicated because it's so far ahead of where we are that it is not assimilatable. We cannot learn it quickly. And in that respect, we appear stupid.
Well, for one thing, I think you might be thinking too linearly, like that, they're more advanced, that means they're us amped up. Things go in different directions. Like, think about music. If you went to a Baroque, like a Bach type person who wrote chorales and stuff like that, and then you played them, modern music, they might not even accept it as music. My late uncle was a big bands musician. He wouldn't acknowledge hip hop as actual music. And that's only in 100 years.
Yes. I think the analogy there is they bring a technology that we would not even be able to acknowledge as a technology because it would be so far beyond us. But what your uncle did was preferential. He does know it's music. And in the respect of aliens bringing a technology, we would know it's a technology. I think that's the point. We just wouldn't be able to acknowledge it, not due to preference, but because it's incomprehensible to us.
But couldn't we say that about a lot of things today? I defy 99% of the population to explain how a microwave works, but they can all operate them.
That's true. So you walk in a department store and there's something new. You've never heard of it. You go, oh, well, that's something new. That's a piece of technology.
Yeah, it's a black box. Yeah. There's inputs and outputs. Can I understand the function it provides without knowing the proof of the function?
I can figure out sort of what it might do based upon today's norms, right? There's buttons on things. And that's where the boundaries come in the physics aspect of it. There's only so much you can do because of the human interaction. They have hands, we have feet, we have various ways of interacting with things. So we're bound by what it is that the UI must be in order to make it usable, right?
Are you making a bandwidth argument?
Not really a bandwidth argument, more of an argument that the alien technology might be so different because of how they interact with things that we wouldn't even recognize it as technology. It wouldn't be a box with a button on it. It would be just a flat, transparent thing that we interact with our brain, and we don't have that same brain, and we don't have that implant in our head, so it's useless to us. I mean, it looks like just a crystal.
Oh, that's a really good observation. Yeah. Their technology would adapt to their biology. If they have a better sense of smell than us, then perhaps their user interfaces would take advantage of that.
That's what would make the technology appear totally different. That's why I'm saying with a human, we can understand the scale of things, and we're bound by the physics and the UI, so to speak, of our world and our bodies. And in 100,000 years, our bodies aren't going to change.
100,000? Yes, they will.
They're not going to change in terms of the general UI.
CRISPR.
What I'm saying is physics isn't going to change. Well, okay. So, all right. Well, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yes,
we're going to get like 3 arms and etc. Yeah, you're right.
100,000 years is a long time.
It's a lot of evolution, but...
Oh, not on an evolutionary scale, on a Turing machine scale. Once we can alter our bodies, I think in just a matter of generations, major changes may occur.
Well, by that time, more than likely, the human brain-computer interface will catch up, right? And you won't be bound by the UI inputs as much as you will be by the brain-to-computer inputs.
Yes.
So I think that, yes, you're still bound by inputs, but the appearance of an object that is some form of technology from an alien species is totally different than projecting forward 100,000 years with humans who, for the most part, are bound by these UI inputs. When we start to get to brain to computer or brain to technology inputs, that's where the break is, right? That's where things start to break, because humans of 100,000 years from now with brain computer inputs might put something into the past, let's say they do, and we wouldn't even recognize it because there's no button, there's no anything. And then extrapolate that to what an alien might do, because they were never bound by the same UI inputs. So there might be nothing recognizable at all as technology, and it might only have brain computer inputs.
Sure.
If they had 10 arms, right? They were more insect-like, but had brilliant brains. Well, how are they going to interact with things? Maybe they have 10 hands. I hate to get too sci-fi, but that's the differentiator. And alien technology dropped, and we sort of shifted the conversation from would we be perceived as ants to could we perceive an alien technology if it landed in our lap?
Yeah, I mean, ants implies a hierarchy to it, because I'm willing to say humans are better than ants, right? Hands down in pretty much every important way. The alien species will be exotic to us. Could it just be so exotic that we look at each other and we're like, I don't know where to begin with this. Let's just go our separate ways? In other words, equal footing, just too dissimilar.
Say that again.
Well, when we use the word ants, it kind of implies a primitiveness that they, because we haven't yet achieved the scientific discoveries they have or the engineering achievements, that we're in some way less able to interact with them. And I don't know that that's the case. Like, go the other direction, let's go 100,000 years into the past, and I don't know exactly what, if Homo sapiens were around or whatever then, but some proto-human being, if you pluck them out and brought them to the future, genetically they're a human. You could raise them here and they'd be like anybody else. But the fact that they grew up there, pluck them out as an adult, they didn't have the socialization and all of the,
UI inputs.
teaching everything about that society is good for, they lack. So in some way they're like, I hesitate to use the word handicapped, but pluck a 100,000-year-old person at the age of 30 and bring them to the future, there's a limit to how I can interact with that person. But that's not really representative, right? I think that there could be this sort of asymptotic plateau we all achieve.
It's hard to answer the question appear as ants. I think the better phrasing of that question would be puny or stupid or pathetic.
Or let's just say not worth our time.
Perhaps not worth our time is another way to phrase it. I think any advanced alien civilization, to your earlier point, 100,000 years more advanced than us, if they came here right now, they would look at us and say, yeah, okay, we get it. They're doing things that are harnessing physics and it's very complicated, but they're still pathetic to us because of, maybe not even pathetic, because that implies an emotiveness to it.
Are people of the 1500s pathetic to you?
Right, exactly. No. So we just know that in the timeline, that's where they are. And any sufficiently advanced species would come and say, okay, well, that's where they are. They would recognize that's where they are. And not necessarily phrase it as pathetic, but just, okay, they're doing a good job and we'll check in on them in 50,000 years.
Well, it would probably be novel for them to observe the differences in journey. I imagine we're further along in some respects than their history and not quite as far along in others in terms of chemistry versus biology or this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's the same universe. There's all the same things to discover if we're interested in all the same things.
That's kind of where we're going with some of the other questions. If the technology was plopped here, what would be the differentiator? And the same thing goes for the reverse. What if you took our technology and put it into a much older alien species' hands? Would it appear useless to them? And probably it would appear useless, but they might have more capability to detect what it is that it does, because if it has a brain computer interface, that means it's emitting a signal. That's just physics, right? Period. Mm-hmm. There's no way there's not some signal coming in and out of it. And they would probably be able to figure that signal out. A sufficiently advanced 100,000 years further along than we are would probably just be able to scan it even though they built things totally different, could they figure out what its inputs and outputs are based on analyzing the radio frequencies or the data coming in and out of it?
Oh, I thought you meant figuring us out. Yeah, figuring out the technology, I'm sure.
Right. And they would do it much quicker because of how advanced they are. Whereas if you plopped an alien species technology into our hands, first, we might not even recognize it right now because we don't do brain to computer interfacing. So it wouldn't even look like something that is a piece of technology, probably, because it wouldn't have all the bells and whistles that are needed to physically interact with it. And then to have us try to understand how it interacts, we might eventually detect the signals coming in and out of it. But then to be able to, it would take a long, long, long time to be able to figure out how to talk to it.
I think you're making two big assumptions. The first and most sinful is that their systems can't have good UI design.
No. Not that they don't have good UI design, but at some point UI design becomes a thing of the past if it's brain to computer interfacing. And I'm talking that long of a timeline.
Well, in that regard, then we would have to assume that there's some level of intelligence with that UI. We could even imagine something adaptive, like an adaptive email program that changes how it works as it knows its user. So even a toddler that can't read English could have some pictographic email system, click on the picture of grandma, send her a heart. And that same software could be a more sophisticated enterprise email solution if it recognizes the user as that's the need, right? That's modern. We could do that today if we wanted to invest the time building it.
Sure.
So why couldn't future technology have this powerful adaptive user interface that is watching you just as you watch it?
Well, good point. But then is it designed to adapt to something it may not recognize, like a human versus the insect alien or whatever that alien looks like? Because the human form is just through adaptation. It's not, a given for carbon-based life.
Right. Well, there's two things to separate for me here. There's like the mechanics of the interface, which I think that is interesting, like my analogy about the smelling aliens. Like, yeah, we're not going to be able to use their technology because we don't have the receptors for it. Or if it's, they see an ultraviolet and their monitors use ultraviolet, we won't see it. But all that stuff is just kind of biological limits I think we could fix, transpose the data into the format suitable for the machine, the human body. Then the question is like, well, do we think that they would look at us as insects? Like, I don't think I can teach an ant how to play chess, even if it had the mechanism to move the pieces, which it doesn't. So I wouldn't try and play chess with an ant. But I'm not convinced that there's like a conscious hierarchy here as well. I think there comes a point when we're problem-solving, thinking beings, and that, maybe I have a bigger brain or more time to think or I'm better trained, but we're on an even footing in some regard.
An even footing with 100,000 year more evolved alien species?
We're all processing information. They've just maybe gotten more of it and delivered more efficiently.
Right, or they've evolved under different conditions, and they're, straight out the gate, their brains are way more powerful than ours. Like,
sure.
They're where after 2,000 years in their time, they're much farther along than 2,000 years of our time. So 100,000 years might be a whole nother world. This goes to the point that at some point, getting someone very specific to talk about the different types of life that could possibly exist is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Because I know there's carbon-based, silicon-based. I think there's one other. And knowing more about that and diving into that would be fascinating.
Yeah, we know, or the royal the human species knows quite a bit about the composition of the cosmos and things like that. So even though we can't necessarily know every form of life because maybe we're just uncreative, we know what it's made out of.
Well, yeah, we're bound by the limits of the universe. And I know our knowledge of the universe isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn close in terms of if you throw a rock in space, we know what it's going to do. We can predict it. Mm-hmm. And there's not really much that deviates from that. And if you throw a rock on Mars, we know what's going to happen. We can predict it. There's no reason to believe that physics is upended in another solar system. So
right.
we've got that bound. And then the second bound is species, whatever it is, how it evolved, what its sensory inputs are, and how it interacts with the world. Because that's going to be the next big determiner of what the technology would look like. from there, then it's how quickly do they progress and come up with novel or new methods of bypassing the body, the physical limitations of the body, and hardwiring directly to the brain. And then after that, or parallel to that, it's how does the species use biology, maybe things like CRISPR, to augment its brain or its processing power or its physical ability as we get further along.
Well, I think we could be criticized here for describing this in much too linear of a pattern. While I agree with you, everything does logically follow that you're describing, it could also be that people of the future decide to embrace some lifestyle and, they all are subsistence farmers or whatever, and that's what makes them happy for the next 100,000 years.
That's true. But then we would never hear of them, so this conversation would be moot, right?
In terms of those are the aliens, yeah, probably. The ones we're going to contact are the, ones who want to explore and seek out.
Well, let's say this. Okay, you just reminded me of something. When colonialization happened, right? Mm-hmm. Columbus or anyone prior to that, and the Vikings landed on the shores of Canada and northeastern America, because apparently they did it well before Columbus.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. When they landed, how did they appear to the Indians that were there? And the Indians at that time, I think with the Vikings, they were pretty violent, right? So they saw them as a threat. I've also read that if the brain isn't grown up seeing certain objects, that they become incomprehensible. So like a boat on the horizon would appear to a very primitive human race as incomprehensible. They wouldn't even notice it. Did you read that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I want to fact check that because I'm not sure if that's the case, but it could be.
I agree. I do too. I have heard that, but it doesn't quite make sense to me. I would think they would see it, go, what the heck is that? And they would either be curious or not, but they at least would recognize that that doesn't belong on the horizon and it is moving. I just can't imagine a world in which their brain just doesn't even register it.
Yeah, definitely I can understand where there's some sort of optical illusion. They have a cognitive struggle with it, but I think that could likely be trained away over time depending on what the stimulus is.
Well, because clearly the Vikings came and they got in trouble and they recognized each other. My point in drawing that analogy is I don't know how true that is, and maybe we can get someone on to answer those questions or explain that better because it doesn't fully make sense to me.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the analogy here is we wouldn't even recognize, like that's like saying if a giant alien ship came through towards our planet that we would go, I don't even know.
No,
we would just kind of, right, exactly. There's no way. But maybe it has to do with how poorly advanced the primitives of Canada and in America were. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I would think they would see a floating thing and go, guys, we got to deal with that.
Well, I think most of those people probably didn't actually see that ship, just the coastal ones who had the time to be looking when it arrived.
But did they see it as something worth paying attention to? And then it landed and they went, oh, those people are shaped like me, enemy, kill them, or hug them, whatever it was.
Yeah.
At what point did they recognize it as novel and worth their attention?
Oh, I would think very quickly as the ship was approaching shore, if they were even there to see it.
But that whole argument is tied into this, I think, in this discussion about alien species and their perception of us and our perception of alien species. What is the root of that? Because I've seen that multiple times, but I just don't know how to make sense of it. The brain can see the visual data, and I think maybe what they're saying is it doesn't perceive it as something worth paying attention to because it hasn't seen that structure of objects before. But again, that still doesn't make sense. If a robot, not a robot, but something that was moving in collapsing squares started walking on the trail behind my house or moving along it, I would look at it and say, okay, that's freaky, and I need to decide what I'm going to do. Am I going to go out and investigate, or am I going to get away? Because that looks wholly like nothing I've ever seen before and incomprehensible in terms of its movement. This is all tied together in some of our earlier conversation about this too. the form of a thing is usually defined by the species that creates it because of their inputs and outputs and the intent to use it and interacting with the world around them, how they see the world. So, if this thing was to be walking on this trail behind my house, I wouldn't miss it. I would see it. There's no way I wouldn't. My eyes work. I wouldn't dismiss it. I'm pretty certain of that.
Well, let's say it was an orangutan, which, I mean, they have rights as they should. Pretty much all primates should have some certain rights in the world. But we can also agree that on some hierarchy, we perceive orangutan as slightly lesser than human, correct?
Yeah.
And you can maybe predict some of its behavior. You can think you have the upper hand intellectually. But at the end of the day, when you interact with it, it's going to make decisions, and those decisions will be unpredictable to you. So even if you have some moral intellectual superiority, there's something novel about the interaction.
Yeah.
So it's not an ant to you. An ant you could perfectly predict. You can know, all right, if I do this to the ant, I'll know its response. You're not going to Skinner box an orangutan the same way.
Yeah, and let's take this, for example. Primitive species in I think it was the Amazon, somebody flew a drone over it and they were throwing spears at it, right?
Oh, I hadn't heard that. That makes perfect sense, though.
You would think, okay.
Knock it down, find out what it is.
Yeah, it's not that they ignored it. Here's an object that they might not recognize or see because it's so foreign to them, but here they are trying to knock it down. So I think we need someone to explain that one.
Yeah.
Or we need to dig into it and go, this is just some kind of myth. I think it might be just a myth.
I'm inclined to lean that direction. Although, there is something there for sure related to, optical illusions and not seeing stuff. Have you seen the famous Richard Wiseman video with the basketball?
No.
Well, I'll send you that offline. We can talk about it another time. But the mind is surprisingly easy to trick when the mind isn't looking. But when you're aware, I need to stay alert, things change a bit.
Ooh, send me that one. We can put that in the show notes. That's fine.
For sure.
I think it's related to this because, again, when are you alerted? And that's what we're getting at here is when are you alerted to make a choice about something? The background processing of your brain doesn't notice it. For instance, camouflage, something is moving, your background processing in your brain doesn't notice it. So yeah, there's nothing to pay attention to. But if it's slightly there, you can see it, but you don't perceive it as a threat because it's background noise. That's one thing. But it's another if it's, like I said, some kind of thing that appears to not be behaving in a way that physics in our world and our interaction with the world would understand, then yeah, I'm going to notice it right away, right? A thing moving along the path that's a collapsing series of triangles and squares that's kind of just undulating by.
Yeah.
I would very certainly notice it.
Now, I've been arguing somewhat strongly that there's this kind of asymptote and that intelligence is intelligence, and we wouldn't necessarily look 100,000 years behind an advanced species, that we could still interact. But a counterpoint to that comes to mind, you know the movie 2001, right?
Oh, of course.
And the book series after that, 2061, 3001, 29.
I did not read those, but I know the movie.
I read all of them. And there's a moment, spoiler alert, where one of the human beings is kind of transformed into this more Star Child kind of creature. And the monolith is kind of, I'm not thankful, but there's just some commentary about now the monolith has someone to talk to because it processes so quickly like a computer that trying to have a conversation with a human being is like if you and I had some sort of pen pal relationship, but we only wrote each other once a year.
Yep.
How could we get anything done?
Well, my related to this, I think about superheroes and Superman. And I think, my God, he's got patience to live in a world that moves as slowly. This slowly. Can you imagine? In order for him to see at the rate he does, because he can see things and interact and move in such a fast pace that it would be torture. It'd be like drip of water hitting your forehead every, second and you not being able to do anything about it. And you're slicing up just one sentence from a person with his speed of processing, because you have to have that speed of processing to move that fast. Just one sentence would be painful. It's like, get the sentence out, please. I can hear you. I can move my mouth faster.
Well, you assume Kryptonian physiology doesn't have a built-in, like, underclocking thing where you can turn down the speed of your brain to match or something.
I suppose that's true, but if it was built in a world where everybody was like you, then why would it?
True.
And so, there's an underclocking that must occur there. Okay, we could put that one to bed. I just think it's funny because it's the truth. It's how would he behave in that world? I would be the Flash. It would be torture. It would be absolute torture without the underclocking. And then when you're in the underclocking, you would know that you can turn it on and go into the overclock mode, and you'd be aware of that. So it would be terrible. You
could
can't
take
the world
a break
just move
from
faster?
things. Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's a whole episode.
Yeah.
The humor in that is great.
For sure.
Or the density of Superman, and when he sits down, does he kind of hover himself above a chair?
Well, we're
right?
talking pre or post crisis Superman.
Oh, I don't know, but I think it's true, right? He would crush every single chair with the density at which his skin must be to be bulletproof.
Yeah, when taken to its logical conclusions.
It's just, I often thought that would make a funny superhero movie, is the absurdity of all of it, but.
Well, I like the parallel in a way that there's an absurdity to what we speculate about 100,000 years down the road.
Exactly. Yes.
Like, there's got to be nanites, though, right? That's the one thing we could count on.
Yes, and they do everything, kind of like Tony Stark's armor. He started off with this really very just all these pieces go on, and now he just pushes a button and all these nanites crawl out, and suddenly he's in armor. He did that in a span of 10 years too.
So yeah,
but it is true in the long run, that incomprehensible sort of nature of technology. And
they might not even have nanites. Maybe they would say like, oh yeah, we did that for a while. It turns out it's too expensive or too this or too that. We do a different thing.
Well, and they could also have evolved. They could have preferred to evolve biologically, but augmenting it. For instance, instead of focusing on technological interaction, hardware, they focused on wetware. And they evolved their species to be able to live in outer space, like tardigrades, right? Yep. They evolved their species to have faster brain processing power. They evolved their species to have landline jacks, wetware type. Yeah. They've evolved to have more arms or more inputs that make them more productive.
It's a slippery slope, but it's definitely going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And that's an interesting topic unto itself, is what would we do as a society when all these questions start to be answered and the possibilities become real? Would you grow a lobotomized species that has, 50 arms and can do more work? All it does is this one very simple thing.
Well, that should just be a machine unless it needs a brain.
Well, but if you could grow it versus build it, there might be an argument for it, right? If you could grow it quickly.
Could be, but if it's just there to serve a task, I have to believe a manufactured device would have the longevity and operational wear and tear optimized for over a biological solution. Although if it's something chemical, like there's a fungus that takes pollutants out of soil, then yeah, we need a biological solution.
Oh, well, that's going to happen soon, but that goes back to our biological boogeymen, and that's how I think we die.
There's some early work in this, actually, oil spill cleanup.
I know.
I just read this in a book.
I'm not saying the oil spill cleanups or some of these targeted things are going to be it, but it's us messing with and designing biological things that is going to destroy us on the earth. I think if I had to hang my hat on something, I still think it would be that.